Salvatio est. Enigma cuderitas est.
In my last video, I talked about the sites of Poverty Point and the cattle mounds that I visited. So now let's get into the native Neo-Atlantean legends of this lost mutant human race. Now, I want to stress, as a Catholic, I'm not trying to justify this belief in giants because I don't believe in evolution. I do believe in evolution. That's why this legend is so important to finding out the truth, because it violates God's evolutionary laws. And I'm not trying to justify that white people have a connection to this lost Aryan race. We're not talking about normal Homo sapiens. A black person and a white person have far more genetic connection than this mysterious small number of human giants of the Ice Age. In fact, more than likely, the real Aryan race was probably tan in color, but may have had blue eyes and reddish hair if they were born from the Garden of Egypt. Then again, depending on how long they've lived in a certain location would also change their skin color and their attributes, so it really doesn't matter. Especially if they were fucking with humans, creating hybrids, which would really complicate things. I hypothesize that the real Aryan race came out of the Garden of Eden, or Egypt, and dispersed up into Europe and Asia after the Great Flood around Egypt, just before the Boiling Aluroid period. Some major natural disaster happened, causing a disruption in the ocean conveyor belts. Right before that period was plunged into a new ice age, delaying the Holocene by a few thousand years. The way you should look at the world at this time is upside down. As the return of the Ice Age happened, multiple migration dispersals came out of Africa just before the last cold spell. As this cold spell intensified, some of those migrants actually came back to Africa to return to the safe haven of the Garden of Eden. It was this dispersal that created the Indo-European Aryans and dispersed the Nephilim out of the Middle East. But this was just the first major migration dispersal. Some of the Indo-European Aryans became the pre-Vikings and Celtics who held on to some of the Atlantean technology, like sailboats. And a handful of them migrated to New England, creating the many stone chambers, but not until right around the Mississippians were born, some 4000 BC. But the Mississippians greatly numbered the pre-Celtics due to many migration waves from Alaska, Polynesia, and even possibly the Atlanteans from Egypt sailing directly to Central America. At this point, the Aryan giants were not unified anymore, but each were trying to control the natives for themselves to kickstart civilization through their blood sacrifice and rituals. Because these Aryans probably saw themselves as demigods and really has superiority complex against normal humans. Now, don't get this idea that the Nephilim are aliens. That's a bunch of bullshit, because if this was a biological terrestrial alien race, it would be very obvious. Our world would be very different. Hell, we may not even be here. And I'm not saying Atlantis was a global civilization. Far from it. I'm only open to the idea of a lost city-state that was a few thousand years ahead of its time, but was destroyed due to the Younger Dryas and a potential surgical natural disaster on this city-state. I would encourage Joe Rogan to go to Venus back some 700 million years ago if you really want to find potential evidence of a lost Type 1 civilization. But good luck on that. Now let me present to you a possible case claim of native Nephilim in the Americas presented by Scott Walter, a researcher and geologist for the History Channel's America Unearthed.
Hey Roger, how you doing?
Hey Scott, glad to meet you.
Nice to finally meet you. Thanks for inviting me out here.
Well, thanks for coming.
Tell me about the situation.
Well, I was looking for gravel to backfill my basement wall.
Okay.
Couldn't get to the gravel pit, you know, with the grain fields here, so I decided to find a place myself and dig for it. And I ran into bones, human bones. All in authorities. They came in and determined they were human bones, and they were very old.
Probably Native American, right?
Two were native, but there's something else interesting in this equation. We found one guy in there that his bones were huge, and they even commented that it was unusually large male individual.
Did the state archaeologists come out then?
The state archaeologists got involved, and the dynamic was totally different. They wanted to get this thing buried as fast as possible.
Really? When you talk about big bones and a big, what you think is a big male, this is reminiscent of giants. I have something I want to show you here. It's an article that talks about giants that was published in the St. Paul paper in 1888, and it says, a prehistoric race, 7 gigantic bodies exhumed while digging a well near Clearwater, Minnesota. A race of giants, and they talk about them being 7 to 8 feet tall. Could your guy be that big?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he is.
Okay.
Yeah, we're in the same category.
We're in northern Minnesota. You're probably familiar with Viking Norse heritage and the idea that the Norse were here.
Oh, there's no doubt. I've been studying the Norse for years, and what they do and the burial mound system. All this is Norse technology, and I told them that.
Okay, Roger, so where is this mound?
The mounds are just on the other side of the cornfield, right on the edge of the Coon Creek.
Okay, well, I'm anxious to go take a look.
Let's do it. Need your help. And here we are. That's where the big guy is buried.
Right here, okay.
Right there. His feet are about approximately right down here in this area. His head is located way up here by where that stone, that marker is.
Roger, let's measure this. Take that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he's about 8 to 9 feet long.
I'd say 8'6".
That's a big guy. Wow. Digging here, you find bones. The state representative for the Native Americans comes out. An anthropologist for the state comes out. Yeah. And then what happened? They start digging?
They started doing the archaeological dig. Their eyes got big because this guy's bones, I tore his feet off. And I tore the shoulders and rib cage of 2 of these native girls that were shoved up against his feet.
The anthropologist said these are females, right?
They were native, female, they're a little petite, and they're in the fetal position, you know, their hands over their face.
Okay. Did they say that this was a giant, or they thought it could be, or what exactly did they say?
Very, very large male. Well out of the ordinary. There's a lot of these guys around, but kept quiet, I don't know why. But this guy was covered up as fast as they could, too.
So it seemed bizarre to you. There was
Very
something not
bizarre.
right about it.
Very bizarre, yes.
Well, based on everything that I've heard so far, what it sounds like to me is you're suggesting there's a cover-up going on here.
I don't see anywhere why or reason why there is not a cover-up. I mean, it's so obvious that you got an 8-foot guy sitting there.
Now, what's interesting about this case is that this was not found in a big mound. So how many little mounds could harbor these giant humans? And it seems likely that the 2 female natives were his daughters due to the placement of the bodies in a phallic symbol. But it sounds like the archaeologists were skeptical of the male being native due to his size. I think most likely he is native, but he's a product of a hybridization from the pre-Celtic Viking Nephilim that mixed with the pre-Mississippian cultures, which points to the Solutrean hypothesis having some validity. So over generations of hybridization is reverting the Nephilim back to normal humans. And yes, I'm very skeptical of the Smithsonian, especially during the 1930s Civilian Conservation Corps, which heavily dug up many Native American mounds all over the US with state-sponsored archaeologists' oversight. This was also during the time that Nazi Germany was just starting to research the Aryan race. And secretly, I think our government, with sponsorships by the Freemasons, may have been secretly trying to find this lost race as well. I've taken enough poli-sci and history classes to know that conspiracies are a reality to some degree, and this may be one of those cases. Now let's take a look at another case coming from Nevada.
Humans have climbed this same narrow path up the jagged mountain for more than 4,000 years. That's how long indigenous peoples lived in and around the Lovelock Cave. The roof of the cave is still coated with soot from countless campfires. According to tribal lore, a race of red-headed giants made its last stand in this cave.
Among the Paiutes, would most of them say that the giants were real?
All that I've talked to say yes.
I've never heard anybody say no.
Devoy Monk has spent all of her 80-plus years in Lovelock. Her family's home today houses a small museum, jam-packed with artifacts and depictions documenting centuries of native culture and pioneer life. Monk has earned the trust of Paiute elders who say the stories are true, that the red-headed interlopers not only killed but ate their ancestors.
My Indian friends tell me they were cannibals, that they set traps, and we have a paper in the other room, that they dug holes in the pathways and where they walked, and then covered them, and then the Indians would fall in, and they said the best part to eat were the thighs.
Famed Nevadan Sarah Winnemucca first wrote in her acclaimed book that the Paiutes waged a 3-year war against a tribe of red-headed cannibals before trapping and then killing the last of them inside Lovelock Cave. Mainstream archaeologists have vigorously rejected the entire story, to the point that the State Museum in Winnemucca admonishes visitors at its front entrance that the red-headed giants are a myth. Bill Snodgrass, the curator of the Marsden House Museum in Lovelock, thinks there is reasonable basis for parts of the story. In the early 20th century, guano miners began excavating the Lovelock Cave and uncovered thousands of artifacts, along with mummified remains, including a few specimens much taller than the typical Paiute of centuries past. Later, scientific excavations found troves of native antiquities, along with bones. Some human remains were destroyed. Others were sent to museums for display. A few, Snodgrass says, were consumed in bizarre initiation rituals. He adds there is evidence, including basketry, of an unknown culture that lived near the cave. Records show some of them had red hair.
There was definitely a different people here.
Many, if not most, of the visitors who end up at the Marsden House Museum have questions about the red-headed cannibals. The locals still enjoy the debate.
Now, there's one thing I am skeptical of when it comes to the description of these giants.
Along with the reports of double rows of teeth, extra digits in the hands and feet are sometimes reported. Along the Illinois River in a cave, a priest claimed he found prints in rock. The larger representation of the human foot was 14 inches and had 6 toes instead of 5. Such as those found in burial mounds near Lake Devlin, Wisconsin, in May of 1912. The dig site at Lake Devlin was overseen by Beloit College, and it included more than 200 effigy mounds that proved to be classic examples of 8th century woodland culture. But the enormous size of the skeletons and elongated skulls found in May of 1912 did not fit very neatly into anyone's concept of a textbook standard. They were enormous. They were not average human beings. First reported on the 4th of May 1912 issue of the New York Times, the 18 skeletons found by the Peterson brothers on Lake Lawn Farm in southwest Wisconsin exhibited several strange and freakish features. Their heights ranged from 7.6 feet and 10 feet, and their skulls, presumably those of men, were much larger than the heads of any race which inhabit America today. They tend to have a double row of teeth, 6 fingers, 6 toes, and like humans, came in different races, and like humans, came in different races, and like humans, came in different races. The teeth in the front of the jaw were regular molars. Heads usually found were elongated and believed due to a longer than normal lifespan. The Lake Devlin find of May 1912 was only one of dozens of several finds that were reported in local newspapers from 1851 forward to the present day.
That would be more than just a mutated hybrid human. This would indicate a species divide. But it's still possible that we could procreate with them, which really complicates the divide between what is a different species, as we see with the liger, a tiger and a lion. But it seems like in the 18th and 19th century there are more claims of simply just taller humans, but not the other attributes, unless those were taken out of the article. So it's not that shocking to see if humans were taller back then, just like many dogs are different sizes with different breeds. If there really is evidence of these humans having 6 fingers, 6 toes, and double rows of teeth with an elongated head, then that would be the true Aryan race, not your average German. Scientists are just now starting to understand how microevolution works with the churning off and on of genes caused by mutations and viruses. So it could be possible that some supernatural intervention created some kind of special virus that changed the humans into these giants, but then over time faded back away into normal humans, or simply just taller humans but without the other attributes. So it's possible, and I can see why the government would want to try to hide this evidence due to the geopolitical ramifications. I mean, can you imagine if Nazi Germany found one of these giants and tried to clone it, just as scientists are trying to bring back the mammoth? So you can see there's a social ramification here that could happen. I mean, people were racist back then. Add this in the mix and it would really complicate the social cohesion. Also, something interesting I noticed while researching some of the mounds. It's not known if a lot of these mounds were actually covered with grass, because back then they didn't have mowers to maintain the grass. But some of these mounds were found to have a lot of wildflowers growing on the slopes of these mounds. So it makes me wonder if the Native Americans have actually built these mounds with a ground cover wildflowers and spread it all over, and then put clay on the top of the platforms with maybe some gravel mix to create a pathway. Now that would be a sight to see. So these mounds may have been very aesthetic to see, and that would indicate that the Native Americans had aesthetic design ideas. Something to keep in mind the next time you visit one of these mounds. Now here's another report about the cave giants.
A mummy has been discovered, a mummy that may reveal the secrets of an even older society, one that dates back to the dawn of civilization.
This is extremely significant. This is unprecedented. We haven't had a find of this importance in my lifetime.
One thing that makes the mummy, known as the spirit caveman, so important are these fine hand-woven fabrics discovered at the burial site.
These textiles represent an extremely sophisticated ability to weave fabric by hand in a time where we didn't realize that people were doing that before.
The mummy was discovered tightly bound up in this matting. Out of respect for the dead, this photograph and this drawing are the only two pictures scientists will allow to be publicly displayed. Recent tests reveal that the mummy is 9,000 years old. That's 3 times older than any other mummy yet discovered in North America. That news has stunned archaeologists, because a mummy can tell scientists how people back then lived, what diseases they had, even what food they ate. Scientists can get that information by studying the mummy's DNA. That requires cutting a small piece of tissue from the body.
That it shouldn't be done.
And that, says Paiute Shoshone tribal leader Alvin Moyles, is desecrating the dead. The mummy was discovered near Paiute Shoshone land. Moyles believes the mummy's spiritual journey has been disturbed, and that the spirit cannot find peace until the body has been properly reburied.
You are bothering the spirit. They're not to be bothered. They're put to rest, and that's where they should be left.
But scientists claim that the mummy is so old that he couldn't possibly be related to the Paiute Shoshones, that the mummy's tribe was here thousands and thousands of years before anybody else.
They do not appear similar to any living Native American in North America. They have receding cheekbones, narrow face, long face. Some Indians have some of those traits, but as a group, those are Caucasoid traits.
The two sides are now caught in a catch-22. One way to prove kinship is through the DNA test, but the tribe doesn't want that because it would require further disturbance of the remains.
The DNA evidence would be definitive for ruling out certain groups. You can't necessarily prove with it which group it was, but you can rule out contending parties.
Until a decision can be made, the mysterious spirit cave mummy will remain trapped in limbo.
Yeah, he's kind of in the legal, spiritual, ethical limbo.
In Carson City, Nevada, Vince Sterla, Channel 3 reports.
Even mummies can't avoid the law and bureaucracy, it appears. Many archaeologists agree it's entirely possible the mummy is not related to any existing tribe in North America.
Yeah, it sounds like the mummy predated most of the Indian tribes from that part of the country.
Again, this seems to support the Solutrean hypothesis, but these hybrid giants may not have been the original ones. Others may have settled in Central America with more Mediterranean attributes. But again, the external attributes are not as important as you will see with many dogs, which have different attributes but all are still part of the same species until they're not able to physically procreate or hybridize due to genital size, cellular fusion, and genetic limitations that start to come about. It's hard to know where that line is on speciation. Hybridization is an aspect of short-term evolution, so it seems clear these giants were able to procreate with humans. I'm sure some of you women might get turned on by that. But as I was saying, just like with dogs, if you let a domesticated dog go back to the wild, many will die off, but some will survive through hybridization and eventually revert back to being a wolf. And that could be happening a lot quicker than you think with these giants. Now in this case, these giants seem to have an appetite for eating not their own kin, but humans, normal humans. This would make a lot of enemies with the Native Americans who greatly outnumbered this race of giants, so size isn't everything. In the end, the Native Americans rebelled against this race, leading to their inevitable demise. But that may be a good thing. Another case by Horatio Barwell Cushman in 1899 in his book The History of the Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Natchez Indians, he states, "The tradition of the Choctaw, a race of giants once lived in the state of Tennessee, with which the ancestors had fought when they arrived in Mississippi, in their migration from the west. The tradition says that the individuals of the giant breed, known as Nahulo, possessed an impressive stature. Cushman believed, along with some Native American tribes, that these giants were more fair-skinned, which the Choctaw killed when they crossed on their side of the Mississippi. According to the story in 1857, the Comanche chief, Rolling Thunder, states, "Many moons ago, a race of white men, 10 feet, and much richer and powerful than any white person now living, who inhabited a large part of the country, stretching from dawn to dusk, their fortifications were crowned on top of the mountains, protecting their cities located in the intermediate valleys. They exceeded all other nations in all kinds of trades. They were smart and brave individual warriors, who ruled the land they had wrested from their former owners. The pale faces today would look like pygmies compared to the giants, both in their art and in their arms." The Comanche chief believed that the Great Spirit had destroyed them due to their immorality. The Navajo are another tribe who claim to have seen these giants, calling them the people of Starnacat, a race of white giants, the largest mining technology that had built the strongholds along the Americas that dominated the West, enslaving the smallest tribe. Eventually the mysterious Starnacat became extinct, or back in the heavens. Now in Aztec and Inca traditions, they claim that their temples were occupied by these giants, and they coexisted with the natives. Even Ferdinand Magellan claims to have seen a race of giant natives in Patagonia in South America on his expeditions along the coast in 1520. So it really does seem like there was some very rare species of human who might have been considered the real megafauna Homo sapiens of the Ice Age, and they were about to go extinct along with the megafauna. But due to their intelligence, they survived a lot longer until people rebelled against them. They no longer held power over the natives, but their blood sacrifices still lingered until Christ came to end all that. So maybe I'm wrong to say that they're not normal humans, because if we could breed with them, then they are categorized to be Homo sapiens, but of a different breed, like many dogs. Now, more than likely these megafauna humans were born from normal humans from Africa, but something caused a change in their DNA with a slight mutation that could have been caused discreetly by supernatural interventions by angels to speed up the process of evolution. Now, supernatural interventions are very rare and subtle. In many cases they require a medium or a priest or a chieftain like at Poverty Point to grant some kind of wish, like from a jinn, or what some Native Americans might call the Pu'unjinini, or fairies. But there's always a price to pay or a side effect from eating that apple, and demonic angels can take advantage of humans for their larger agenda, such as ridding the human race for a more superior human species. Longevity may have been one of the attributes as we see referenced in Genesis. If their pride became so large to the point of them cannibalizing the average human, then I can see why God had to kill them off before speciation divergence happens, where we might be living in a world with 9-foot doors. More than likely, many different cultures from Europe to Africa inherited some of the genes of this breed of human that spread over the planet and slowly thinned out and died off. For example, one case could be out of Egypt. As part of an ongoing research into mummies, scientists investigated a skeleton found in 1901 in a tomb near Beit Khalaf in Egypt. Previous research estimated that the bones dated to around the 3rd dynasty, around 3000 BC, near the date of Poverty Point. Prior work suggested that the skeleton of the man, who would have stood at around 6 foot 1.6 inches tall, may have belonged to Sanakht, a pharaoh during the 3rd dynasty. Previous research on ancient Egyptian mummies suggested that the average height for a man around that time would be around 5 foot 6 inches, according to Michael Habacht, an Egyptologist at the University of Zurich's Institute of Evolutionary Medicine. Accelerated and excessive growth, a condition known as giganticism, can occur when the body generates too much growth hormone. This usually occurs because of a tumor or a pituitary gland of the brain, but they have not concluded that with this Egyptian royal. Then again, some aspects of the so-called giganticism disease could be remnants of the Nephilim, at least when it comes to the increase in growth hormones not caused by a tumor. Because not all gigantism diseases is actually caused by that. The current argument is that ancient Egyptian kings were likely better fed and better health than the commoners of the era, so they could be expected to grow taller than average. But not all archaeologists agree on this. In fact, some believe that the average commoner was actually quite healthy and lived longer than the average person living outside of the Nile Delta region. Still, over the 6 foot tall remains that the scientists analyze is puzzling because this person was taller than Ramses II. This also doesn't take into account that the bones actually shrink over thousands of years as water is evaporated out, even with mummification. Now, did the Nephilim also have red hair? It's hard to say because we know that Egyptian mummies did have red hair, but many archaeologists think that's simply due to the chemicals during the embalming process that causes the hair to turn reddish or orange over a period of long time. But it's possible that the Egyptians were aware of this phenomenon when they used this embalming techniques, intentionally wanting to create this kind of reddish orange hair, and they could be mimicking something from farther in the ancient past, that maybe at one time the original Atlantean Egyptians did have kind of reddish hair and they wanted to mimic this tradition. So not sure why Hitler didn't think redheads were superior. He must not like gingers. So yes, there are cases of white Egyptians. Many anthropologists accept this. For example, the cases of Gelbelin pre-dynastic mummy of the British Museum referred to as Ginger, which is 3000 BC. And that specific mummy could have a connection with the original Nephilim or Aryan race. But the mummies of the Flag el Gamir's graveyards in south of Cairo, they date to around 30 BC, and this is more likely just simply Romans inheriting Egypt at this time period. Another case is Ramses II, who also had kind of wavy, blondish, reddish hair. And yes, they declare him as to be more Caucasian, but more Mediterranean Caucasian. It's not the same as Northern European Caucasian. There are different types of ethnic groups. So there's a potential that the Gelbelin mummy in the British Museum and Ramses may have a connection, at least sharing some traits. But at the same time, many Nubians and Ethiopians, especially the Habesha people, may have also shared some of these lost traits of the Nephilim. So Africans and white people did inherit Egypt over thousands of years. It switched back and forth because simply, Nile Delta is very close to Europe, and during the Ice Age, many Caucasians would have went down to Africa for shelter against the Ice Age. So yeah, this is not a mystery in some sense. We know that white people did inherit Egypt, but at the same time, many Nubians and Ethiopians did also inherited Egypt, and they blended together as a multicultural kind of society over thousands of years. Now, so more than likely, both of these different cultures inherited some traits, but it's hard to know because it's being blended over time and fading away. But that doesn't make the black Egyptian pharaohs and the white Egyptian pharaohs the original Aryans. Again, it's the stature that's most important that we have to figure out, why they were excessively tall. This was most likely what I might refer to as the G mutant, the giant mutation, I guess. Something caused that, and it's still a mystery. And again, it really doesn't matter if these giants were white or black. What matters is if they were able to create the Philosopher's Stone. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, according to Plato, he referred to it as orichalcum, something the Atlanteans had the ability to create. So what is orichalcum? Well, the number one thing every civilization has to be able to make to become a Type 1 civilization like ourselves is the ability to create metal at mass. It takes an alchemist and a philosopher to do this. Orichalcum may have been a noble metal such as platinum. It was supposed to be mined, or one type of bronze or brass, or possibly some type of metal alloy consisting of copper. The word actually means gold copper, and those at Poverty Point smelted copper and formed it to their clay jewelry to save on resources. They also did this at the cattle mounds with their ear spools. But most of the evidence is long rusted away. But I would think the Nephilim would be able to increase the economy's scale for the production of metal, where we would see remnants of metal all over America, but instead it's quite rare. Clearly it seems the Aryan Nephilims migrated to North America, but you're telling me since the fall of Atlantis around 12,000 BC, it took them 9,000 years to kickstart civilization in the Americas? Not until the establishment of Poverty Point some 3000 BC? I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like a superior race to me. If they had such high IQ, then why don't we see abundant amounts of evidence of the Philosopher's Stone creation process? And the creation of steel, the most important metal we have ever created. You can't go to space without it, as Elon points out. So it wasn't until people in Poverty Point who discovered the techniques of forging copper that started the Mississippian Loose Confederation of Tribes. Seems like by this time most of the Aryan giants had died off. They had 7,000 years to kickstart civilization in Neo-Atlantis, aka the Americas, but they didn't. Instead, they resorted to cannibalism while people at Poverty Point were trying to figure out how to create the Philosopher's Stone. From the knowledge that was probably passed up from Central America, where maybe the Nephilim did try to start civilization again, but mostly it was left to the natives to figure out the techniques through trial and error. I call it the Philosopher's Stone because the original meaning of the philosopher was an alchemist, an occult scientist. You need a person who has the vision to come up with theories on profound questions on why should I even try to make metal, and the questions on how to manipulate the four elements of nature. A philosopher is the person who establishes the central ideas of some movement or a cult of the blacksmiths, who must live by the light of reason to know the techniques of manipulating the four elements. Many tribes have tried but failed to continue on the process. They didn't have the vision, but certain natives did have the vision. The vision of the philosopher has to stay true to his faith that he will create this metal and something beneficial will come out. But in order to do this person has to be rational, sensible, and calm while performing this hard labor, especially under trying circumstances, through many failures. The art of creating metal requires earth, wind, fire, and water to forge the fifth element, the pure stone that would forever change civilization. If only this person can see the secret vision and potential. And that is what the Aryan race have failed to do, despite them having a biological advantage. It was those in Poverty Point and those who inherited Egypt that made this possible. So maybe the Aryans were not so super after all.
So whether there's some truth to these legends, it's hard to say. But I think we need to give thanks this Thanksgiving to Native Americans for, maintaining this site to some degree and, holding on the traditions of these legends, which are global in some sense with the biblical connections and Atlantean connections, but also very regional, because then I think all Americans can adopt this tradition of this Native American ancient prehistoric tradition, which a lot of cultures like Japan has a very strong ancient tradition, but America seems to be lacking. And I think we could bring that back, whether to use your own talents, whether in animation or as me as a landscape architect, to maybe someday find an opportunity to recreate these mounds and reconstruct it to renovate it and really use it, like maybe for Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. I guess they changed their name, but you know what I'm saying. So just trying to bring back the culture, because right now it's looking kind of sad, and I wish that they would try to maintain it, fix up the areas where there's erosion, just dump new soil there and get a group of people to do it and fix it up and find out, stick around, find out if there really is a Nephilim giant in these chambers. Well, this has been Enigma Seeker. Keep seeking those enigmas and have a good Thanksgiving.
Enigma depravatio est. Enigma crudelitas est.